In a quiet town in the Midwest where everyone seemed to know each other's business, there lived a woman named Maya. She was adopted as a baby by the Thompsons, a wealthy white family known for their generosity and involvement in the community. The Thompsons were pillars of respectability, always hosting charity events, attending church every Sunday, and ensuring they maintained an impeccable reputation. But Maya's presence in their home had always been a topic of whispered curiosity among neighbors and acquaintances. Growing up, Maya often felt like she didn't quite fit in. As the only black child in her family and one of the few in her school, she stood out in ways that made her uncomfortable. While her adoptive parents loved her deeply and provided everything she needed, Maya couldn't ignore the subtle comments or stares from people who questioned how someone like her could belong to such a respectable family. Some would say things like, "She must be so grateful you took her in," or, "You've done such good work with her." These remarks stung, even though Maya knew they weren't meant maliciously. Over time, she learned to smile through the discomfort and keep her feelings bottled up. Despite these challenges, Maya grew into a strong, intelligent young woman. She excelled in school, earned scholarships, and eventually moved to Chicago to pursue her dreams. There, she found freedom and independence away from the watchful eyes of her hometown. Maya built a life for herself, surrounded by friends who accepted her for who she was without judgment. Yet no matter how far she went, she couldn't escape the memories of growing up in a world that constantly reminded her she was different. Years passed, and Maya rarely returned to her hometown. But when her younger sister announced her engagement, Maya knew she couldn't miss the wedding. Her adoptive mother, Mrs. Thompson, was overjoyed at the news of Maya coming back home. "We've missed you so much," she said over the phone. "It won't be the same without you here." Though Maya appreciated her mother's warmth, she couldn't shake the unease creeping into her mind. Returning home meant facing all those old feelings, the sideways glances, the awkward silences, and the unspoken questions about her place in the family. When Maya arrived, the familiar sights and sounds of her childhood greeted her. The sprawling house with its manicured lawn, the scent of Mrs. Thompson's homemade apple pie wafting through the air, and the sound of her father's booming laugh echoed memories both sweet and bittersweet. Her siblings hugged her tightly, happy to see her after so long. But not everyone was thrilled. Some relatives muttered under their breath, wondering why Maya had stayed away for so long and whether she still considered herself part of the family. Tension reached its peak during the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding. The room buzzed with chatter as guests mingled and shared stories. Maya sat quietly at the table, trying to blend into the background. She wore a simple navy blue dress and kept her hair styled neatly, hoping to avoid drawing attention to herself. But fate had other plans. A distant aunt seated across from her leaned forward and asked loudly, "So, Maya, what are you doing with your life now? Still working hard to make something of yourself?" The question hung in the air, dripping with condescension. Maya felt her cheeks flush, but she forced herself to remain composed. Before she could respond, another relative chimed in, saying, "You know, it's amazing how articulate you are for someone like you." The words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. Around the table, some shifted uncomfortably, while others chuckled, nervously. It wasn't the first time Maya had heard such comments, but being back in this environment made them cut deeper than ever. For a moment, Maya considered excusing herself and leaving the room. Instead, she took a deep breath and looked directly at the aunt who had spoken. In a calm, steady voice, she replied, "Thank you for noticing my articulation. I've worked hard to get where I am today, and I'm proud of what I've achieved. Being someone like me doesn't define my worth. It's my actions and character that do." The room fell silent. No one expected such a bold response, least of all the aunt, whose face turned red with embarrassment. As the evening wore on, Maya replayed the conversation in her mind. She knew she had handled it well, but the incident left her feeling drained. She retreated to her room early, seeking solace in the quiet darkness. Lying in bed, she thought about how much she had changed since leaving home. Back then, she might have let the comment slide, too afraid to rock the boat. But now, she refused to shrink herself to make others comfortable. Little did she know, The next day would bring an even bigger surprise, one that would challenge her family in ways none of them could predict. Maya tossed and turned that night, unable to shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. She glanced at her phone, where a text message from Daniel read, "See you soon, love." Smiling faintly, she wondered how her family would react when they finally met him. Whatever happened, Maya knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it head-on. The next morning dawned bright and crisp, the kind of day that seemed tailor-made for a wedding. Birds chirped outside, and sunlight streamed through the windows of the Thompson household. Inside, however, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The previous night's rehearsal dinner had left an undeniable rift in the air. Some family members whispered among themselves about Maya's sharp response to her aunt's comment, while others avoided the topic altogether. Mrs. Thompson bustled around the kitchen, trying to maintain a cheerful facade as she prepared breakfast. But even her forced optimism couldn't mask the unease lingering over the house. Maya woke up earlier than usual, unable to shake the restless energy coursing through her body. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple yet elegant outfit, a cream blouse paired with tailored trousers, and took extra care with her hair and makeup. As much as she tried to convince herself that today would be just another ordinary day, she knew it wasn't. Deep down, she felt the weight of anticipation pressing against her chest. Something big was coming, and she could sense it in every creak of the floorboards and every distant murmur of conversation. Breakfast was a subdued affair. The clinking of forks against plates filled the silence as family members exchanged polite but strained small talk. Maya sat quietly at the table, sipping her coffee and observing the dynamics around her. Her younger sister, Emily, chattered nervously about last-minute wedding details, clearly trying to distract everyone from the elephant in the room. Mr. Thompson buried himself in the newspaper, occasionally glancing up with a forced smile. And Mrs. Thompson kept sneaking worried looks at Maya, as if bracing herself for another confrontation. Just as the meal was winding down, there was a knock at the door. Everyone froze, startled by the unexpected sound. Mrs. Thompson stood up, hesitantly, and made her way to the entrance, smoothing her apron as she went. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock, and she let out a soft gasp loud enough for those in the dining room to hear. Curiosity piqued. Maya rose from her seat and followed her mother to see what, or who, had caused such a reaction. Standing on the porch was a tall, striking man with warm brown skin, broad shoulders, and a confident smile that lit up his face. He wore a neatly pressed suit and carried a bouquet of flowers in one hand. His presence radiated calm authority, yet there was also a kindness in his expression that immediately put people at ease. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the man stepped forward and extended his hand toward Mrs. Thompson. "Good morning," he said in a deep, steady voice. "You must be Mrs. Thompson. I'm Daniel Carter, Maya's husband." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted from behind Mrs. Thompson, where several relatives had gathered to investigate the commotion. Maya watched as her adoptive mother's face shifted from confusion to disbelief, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Someone muttered, "Husband?" under their breath, and within seconds, the hallway buzzed with hushed whispers. Questions flew back and forth. "When did this happen? Why didn't we know? Is this some kind of joke?" Maya stepped forward, her heart pounding but her expression calm. She walked over to Daniel, who greeted her with a reassuring grin. Taking his hand, she turned to face her stunned family. "Everyone," she began, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "This is my husband, Daniel. We've been married for 3 years." The revelation hit like a tidal wave. Relatives exchanged incredulous looks, their minds racing to process the bombshell Maya had just dropped. Some stared openly at Daniel, sizing him up as though trying to figure out how someone so different from the Thompsons could possibly be part of their family. Others shot accusatory glances at Maya, as if demanding an explanation for keeping such a significant secret. A few simply gawked, unsure of how to react. Mrs. Thompson finally found her voice. 3 years? She repeated, her tone wavering. between surprise and hurt. "Why didn't you tell us, Maya?" Maya met her mother's gaze without flinching. "Because I wanted to protect our relationship," she replied honestly. "Daniel and I built a life together before sharing it with anyone else. It wasn't about hiding. It was about making sure our marriage was strong enough to stand on its own." Her words did little to quell the rising tide of emotions. One uncle scoffed loudly, muttering something about keeping secrets and not trusting family. Another relative leaned over to whisper, "Did she think we wouldn't approve?" Meanwhile, Emily, the bride-to-be, looked torn between excitement and anxiety, unsure whether this sudden twist would overshadow her special day. As the murmurs grew louder, Daniel stepped forward, his demeanor calm but commanding. "I understand this might come as a shock," he said, addressing the crowd. "But I want to assure you all that Maya and I are deeply committed to each other. We didn't mean to cause any trouble. We simply wanted to introduce ourselves, on our own terms." His words carried weight, silencing some of the more vocal critics. Still, skepticism lingered in the air. Maya squeezed Daniel's hand, drawing strength from his presence. She knew this moment would not be easy, but she also knew it was necessary. This was her chance to show her family who she truly was, not just the adopted daughter they thought they knew, but a woman who had grown into her own identity, capable of making choices that aligned with her values. Overwhelmed by the intensity of the situation, Mrs. Thompson ushered everyone into the living room for an impromptu family meeting. Chairs were hastily arranged in a circle, and though tensions ran high, no one dared leave. Maya and Daniel took their seats side by side, holding hands as they prepared to face whatever came next. For Maya, this was more than just introducing her husband. It was a turning point. She realized that returning home had forced her to confront not only her own insecurities, but also the biases and assumptions embedded within her adoptive family. And now, standing beside Daniel, she felt ready to challenge those beliefs head-on. Whatever happened next, she vowed to stay true to herself and to the love she shared with the man sitting beside her. The stage was set for a reckoning, and Maya knew the hardest conversations were still ahead. But as she looked around the room, at the faces of her family, she allowed herself a small flicker of hope. Perhaps amidst the discomfort and uncertainty, there was room for growth for all of them. The living room buzzed with tension as the Thompson family gathered in an awkward circle. Chairs creaked under shifting bodies, and the air felt heavy with unspoken questions. Maya and Daniel sat side by side, their hands clasped tightly together, a silent signal of unity in the face of what was about to unfold. Mrs. Thompson, still reeling from the shock of meeting her son-in-law for the first time, tried to maintain control of the situation. She cleared her throat nervously before speaking. "Maya," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we're all surprised. No one knew you were married, not even us, your own family. Why didn't you tell us?" Maya took a deep breath, her dark eyes scanning the room. She saw confusion etched on some faces, judgment on others, and a flicker of curiosity, here and there. For years she had carried the weight of feeling like an outsider in this very house. Now, sitting beside Daniel, she felt something new. Resolve. This was her moment to speak her truth. "I understand why this feels sudden," Maya said, her tone calm but firm. "But Daniel and I chose not to share our marriage right away because we wanted to build a strong foundation for ourselves first. We didn't want external opinions or pressures influencing how we started our life together." Her words hung in the air, met with mixed reactions. Some nodded thoughtfully, while others exchanged skeptical glances. An older cousin leaned forward, his arms crossed over his chest. "That makes sense in theory," he said, raising an eyebrow. "But isn't keeping something this big from your family dishonest? You've been part of our lives since you were a baby, Maya. Doesn't that count for anything?" Before Maya could respond, Daniel spoke up. His voice was steady and measured, yet warm enough to soften the edge of confrontation. "It's not about dishonesty," he explained. "It's about timing. Every couple has their own journey, and ours involve taking the time to grow together before sharing that growth with others. Trust me, no one values family more than Maya does. But sometimes protecting your relationship means making tough decisions, even if they're misunderstood. His explanation seemed to resonate with a few people, particularly Emily, who sat quietly in the corner. As the bride-to-be, she had initially worried that this revelation might overshadow her wedding weekend. But watching Daniel defend their marriage with such sincerity softened her heart. She glanced at Maya and gave her a small, supportive smile. Not everyone was convinced, though. One of Maya's uncles shook his head dismissively. "I don't care how noble it sounds," he muttered. "If you really respected your family, you'd have told us sooner. Instead, you show up out of nowhere with him." He gestured vaguely toward Daniel, his tone dripping with disapproval. Daniel flinched slightly at the comment, but Maya squeezed his hand reassuringly. Her jaw tightened as she turned to face her uncle. "Respect isn't just about following rules or doing what others expect," she said sharply. "It's about being true to yourself and respecting the person you choose to spend your life with. Daniel is my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. If you can't see past his skin color or where he comes from, then maybe you need to reflect on what your values really are." The room fell silent after her outburst. Maya's words cut through the tension like a knife, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Others stared at Maya, stunned by her boldness. Even Mrs. Thompson looked taken aback, though she quickly composed herself. "Well," she said softly, attempting to diffuse the tension, "this is certainly a lot to process. Let's try to focus on understanding each other rather than assigning blame." Her attempt at diplomacy prompted a reluctant agreement among the group. Slowly, the conversation shifted from accusations to questions. Relatives began asking Daniel about his background, where he grew up, what he did for work, how he and Maya met. At first, the inquiries felt probing, almost interrogative, but Daniel handled them with grace, answering each question patiently and openly. He shared stories about growing up in Detroit, pursuing a career in architecture, and falling in love with Maya during a chance encounter at a bookstore in Chicago. As he spoke, the initial hostility in the room began to fade. People listened, intently, drawn in by Daniel's charm and authenticity. A younger cousin giggled when he mentioned how Maya had accidentally spilled coffee on his favorite book during their first meeting. Another relative chuckled at the story of their disastrous road trip to Wisconsin, where they got lost 3 times before finally finding their destination. Even Mr. Thompson, who had remained mostly quiet until now, found himself nodding along. "Sounds like you two have been through quite a bit together," he remarked gruffly, though there was a hint of admiration in his voice. "That's right," Daniel replied with a smile. "Marriage isn't always easy, but it's worth every challenge when you're with the right person." By the end of the impromptu meeting, the atmosphere had transformed. While not everyone fully embraced the idea of Maya and Daniel's relationship, many seemed willing to give them a chance. Emily, in particular, made a point to approach the couple afterward, hugging both of them tightly. "Thank you for being honest with us," she said sincerely. "And thank you for coming today. Your love inspires me." Maya felt a lump rise in her throat as she hugged her sister back. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her family could learn to accept her for who she truly was. And Daniel, standing beside her with his unwavering support, reminded her that she didn't have to face any of this alone. As the day wore on, preparations for the wedding resumed, albeit with a newfound awareness hanging over the household. Conversations around race, identity, and belonging became less taboo, sparked by Maya's courage to stand firm in her truth. Though challenges lay ahead, the seeds of change had been planted. And in that moment, Maya realized that sometimes, breaking old patterns required stepping into the unknown, even if it meant risking everything familiar. The wedding day arrived, and the Thompson household buzzed with a mix of excitement and lingering tension. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from the garden. Inside, the family moved about in a flurry of activity, adjusting ties, fixing hair, and ensuring every detail was perfect for Emily's big day. Despite the joyous occasion, whispers about Maya and Daniel still floated through the halls. Some relatives had warmed up to the idea of Daniel being part of the family, while others remained guarded, their discomfort simmering beneath polite smiles. Maya stood in front of the mirror in her childhood bedroom, adjusting the silver bracelet on her wrist. She wore a soft lavender dress that complemented her complexion, its flowing fabric catching the light as she moved. Her hair was styled in loose waves, framing her face elegantly. Though she looked calm on the outside, her mind raced with thoughts of what the day might bring. Would her presence and Daniel's overshadow Emily's special moment? Or would the family finally begin to see them as a couple worthy of celebration? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Daniel, dressed in a sharp navy suit that matched his confident demeanor. He smiled warmly when he saw her, his eyes lighting up with admiration. "You look beautiful," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Thank you," Maya replied, returning his smile. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Daniel chuckled softly before growing serious. "How are you holding up? I know this isn't easy." Maya sighed, lowering herself onto the edge of the bed. "It's complicated. Part of me feels like we're making progress, but another part wonders if it's just surface-level acceptance. You know how some people can act fine one minute and then go back to old habits the next." Daniel sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her knee. "Change takes time, love. What matters is that we're here, together, showing them who we are. They'll come around, or they won't. Either way, we've done our part." His words grounded her, reminding her why they had decided to attend the wedding in the first place. This wasn't just about introducing Daniel to her family. It was about challenging the assumptions and biases that had shaped her life for so long. With a deep breath, Maya stood up, smoothing her dress. "Let's do this," she said firmly, taking Daniel's hand. At the venue, a picturesque outdoor garden adorned with white chairs and cascading floral arrangements, guests mingled under the bright afternoon sun. The ceremony was set to begin shortly, and the bride's side of the aisle filled quickly with relatives eager to witness Emily's walk down the aisle. As Maya and Daniel took their seats near the front, they couldn't help but notice the curious glances directed their way. Some were subtle, while others were outright stares. A few distant cousins whispered audibly, speculating about Daniel's role in the family. Despite the scrutiny, Daniel remained unfazed. He greeted those around him with a friendly nod and an easy smile, refusing to let negativity affect his mood. Maya, on the other hand, felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She recognized the looks, the whispers. They were all too familiar. But instead of shrinking into herself, she straightened her posture, meeting each gaze head-on. If they wanted to judge her, so be it. She wasn't going to apologize for living authentically. When the music began and Emily appeared at the end of the aisle, all eyes turned toward the radiant bride. Clad in a flowing white gown, she walked slowly, her arm linked with Mr. Thompson's. The sight brought tears to many eyes, including Maya's. For a brief moment, the weight of everything else faded away, replaced by pure joy for her sister. As the ceremony unfolded, Maya found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her here. She thought about the countless times she'd felt out of place growing up, the microaggressions she'd endured, and the courage it had taken to step into her own identity. And now, sitting beside Daniel, she realized how far she'd come. Their relationship wasn't just a partnership. It was a testament to resilience, love, and the power of choosing oneself. After the vows were exchanged and the newlyweds kissed to thunderous applause, the reception kicked off with energy. Tables laden with gourmet food lined the space, and a live band played upbeat tunes that encouraged guests to hit the dance floor. Maya and Daniel joined the festivities cautiously at first, unsure of how they'd be received. To their surprise, several relatives approached them throughout the evening, extending olive branches in the form of small talk and compliments. One aunt, who had initially been frosty toward Daniel, pulled Maya aside during dessert. "I want to apologize for my behavior yesterday," she admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. "Meeting someone new can be overwhelming, especially when it happens unexpectedly. But Daniel seems like a wonderful man, and I'm happy for you. Both." Maya blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the sincerity in her aunt's tone. "Thank you," she said simply, offering a warm smile. "That means a lot." Even Mr. Thompson, who had always been reserved in his interactions with Maya, made an effort to connect with Daniel. During a lull in the dancing, he invited Daniel to join him for a stroll around the garden. As they walked, they discovered a shared interest in history and architecture, bonding over stories of landmarks they'd visited. By the time they returned to the party, Mr. Thompson clapped Daniel on the shoulder, saying, "You're all right, son. Welcome to the family." These moments of connection didn't erase years of discomfort overnight, but they marked a turning point. Slowly, barriers began to crumble, replaced by tentative bridges of understanding. For Maya, watching her family open up, even in small ways, felt like a victory. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Later that evening, as the reception wound down and the golden hour light bathed the garden in a warm glow, Daniel stood to give a speech. Holding a glass of champagne, he addressed the crowd, his voice steady and heartfelt. "First, let me say congratulations to Emily and her husband. Today has been a beautiful reminder of what love can create, a bond that brings people together, no matter their differences." He paused, scanning the room before continuing. "But today has also been meaningful for Maya and me. When we decided to share our marriage with her family, we knew it wouldn't be easy. We knew there might be questions, doubts, or even resistance. But we also believed in the power of love to transcend those challenges. Love doesn't care about skin color, background, or societal expectations. It sees beyond all of that and chooses to embrace what truly matters: character, kindness, and mutual respect." The room grew quiet, captivated by Daniel's words. He glanced at Maya, his expression softening. "Maya is the strongest, most compassionate person I know. Being with her has taught me the importance of standing firm in your truth, even when it's hard. So to the Thompsons, thank you for welcoming me today. Not because I expect perfection, but because I believe in the potential for growth. And to everyone here, remember that love is a choice we make every day. Choose wisely and choose often." When Daniel finished, the room erupted into applause. Tears glistened in Maya's eyes as she stood to hug him tightly. Around them, relatives wiped their own eyes, moved by the sincerity of his message. Even those who had struggled to accept Daniel earlier seemed touched by his grace and wisdom. The night drew to a close. Maya reflected on the whirlwind of emotions she'd experienced over the past few days. From public humiliation to unexpected acceptance, the journey had been anything but smooth. Yet through it all, she had stayed true to herself, and that made all the difference. With Daniel by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that love, resilience, and authenticity could overcome even the toughest obstacles. The days following the wedding were a blur of emotions for Maya. The whirlwind of events, the confrontation, the speeches, and the slow but steady thawing of her family's resistance left her both exhausted and exhilarated. As she packed her suitcase to return to Chicago, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. For years, she had carried the weight of feeling like an outsider in her own adoptive family. Now, thanks to Daniel's unwavering support and her own courage, cracks had begun to form in the walls of prejudice and misunderstanding that had long stood between them. On their final morning in town, Maya and Daniel sat together at the kitchen table, sharing one last cup of coffee before heading to the airport. The house was unusually quiet. Most of the relatives had already departed, leaving only Mr. and Mrs. Thompson behind. Maya glanced at her parents, who were seated across from her, sipping tea. Their expressions were unreadable, though there was a softness in their eyes that hadn't been there before. It was as if they were seeing Maya, not just as their adopted daughter, but as a woman who had grown into her own identity. "Before you leave," Mrs. Thompson began hesitantly, setting her teacup down. "We wanted to say something," She exchanged a glance with her husband, who nodded encouragingly. Maya, we realize now that we haven't always been fair to you. We thought we were doing everything right, giving you opportunities, making sure you were cared for, but we failed to see how our actions sometimes made you feel excluded. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this, a genuine acknowledgement of pain she'd buried deep inside for so long. Her mother continued, her voice trembling, slightly. We didn't mean to hurt you, sweetheart. But looking back, I can see where we went wrong. We treated your differences like something to be managed instead of celebrated. And when you brought Daniel into our lives, it forced us to confront those mistakes. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, joining the conversation. Your mother's right, he said gruffly. We should have listened more and assumed less. You've always been part of this family, Maya, but maybe we forgot to let you know how much you mean to us. Seeing you stand up for yourself and for Daniel made us realize how proud we are of the person you've become. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes as she absorbed their words. She hadn't anticipated an apology, let alone one so heartfelt. For years she had craved validation from her adoptive parents, yearning for them to truly see her beyond the surface level. Now sitting here with Daniel beside her, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't known she needed. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. That means more to me than you know. Mrs. Thompson reached across the table to take Maya's hand. You deserve happiness, Maya. And if Daniel makes you happy, then we're grateful for him too. Please don't ever feel like you have to choose between your family and your life in Chicago. There's room for all of it. The moment was tender and raw, filled with unspoken forgiveness and hope. Daniel squeezed Maya's hand under the table, offering silent support. He understood the significance of this conversation, not just for Maya, but for the entire family. It was a step toward healing, a chance to rewrite old narratives and build new ones rooted in understanding. As they drove to the airport later that day, Maya stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of her hometown roll by. She felt lighter, as though a burden she hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted. Turning to Daniel, she smiled softly. Do you think they really mean it? She asked, her tone tinged with both hope and skepticism. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I do. Change doesn't happen overnight, but they're trying. That's what matters. You're amazing, you know that? Maya said, leaning her head against his shoulder. Without you, none of this would have happened. I wouldn't have had the strength to face them. Or myself. Daniel chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Don't give me all the credit. You're the one who stood tall even when it was hard. I'm just lucky enough to be along for the ride. Their laughter filled the car, easing the lingering tension. For the first time in years, Maya felt optimistic about her relationship with her adoptive family. They still had work to do, old habits die hard, but she believed they were capable of growth. And with Daniel by her side, she knew she could navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. Back in Chicago, life resumed its usual rhythm. Maya returned to her job at a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting underprivileged youth, pouring her energy into projects that aligned with her values. Daniel threw himself into his architectural firm, working late nights to finalize designs for a community center he was passionate about. Despite their busy schedules, they made time for each other, cherishing the little moments that kept their bond strong. But the impact of their visit to the Thompson household rippled far beyond those few days. Over the weeks that followed, Maya received calls and texts from various relatives checking in and asking questions, not just about her life with Daniel, but about her experiences growing up as a Black woman in a predominantly white environment. At first, Maya approached these conversations cautiously, unsure of whether they were genuine or merely performative. But as the interactions continued, she realized that many of her relatives were genuinely curious and willing to learn. One evening, while video calling her younger sister Emily, Maya found herself laughing harder than she had in months. Emily regaled her with stories about married life, poking fun at her husband's obsession with fantasy football. Then, out of nowhere, Emily said, "You know, meeting Daniel changed the way I think about stuff. Like it made me realize how sheltered I've been. I want to be better, for you, for everyone." Maya blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in her sister's voice. "Emily," she started, unsure of what to say. "No, really," Emily interrupted. "You've always been my big sister, but now I see you as someone who's brave enough to challenge the status quo. If anyone deserves happiness, it's you. So thank you for being you." By the end of the call, Maya was wiping tears from her cheeks. Conversations like these reminded her why she had chosen to face her fears head-on. Every small victory, every relative who took a step toward understanding, was proof that change was possible. Months passed, and the ripple effect of Maya and Daniel's unexpected appearance continued to transform the Thompson family. Discussions around race, privilege, and identity became less taboo and more frequent. Relatives who had once dismissed such topics as irrelevant began attending workshops and reading books recommended by Maya. Even Mr. Thompson, who had initially struggled with the idea of having a son-in-law so different from himself, found common ground with Daniel over shared hobbies like gardening and history. During Thanksgiving dinner, the family gathered around the table, laughter filling the air. Gone were the awkward silences and judgmental stares that had characterized previous reunions. Instead, there was warmth and openness, a stark contrast to the tension of the summer wedding. Maya looked around the room, taking in the sight of her loved ones interacting freely without pretense. Her gaze landed on Daniel, who sat beside her, holding her hand beneath the table. His presence had not only challenged her family's assumptions, but it also strengthened their relationships. Through him, they had learned to embrace difference rather than fear it. And through her, they had discovered the importance of listening, learning, and growing. As dessert was served, Maya raised her glass in a toast. "To love," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Not just romantic love, but the kind of love that brings us closer to each other, even when it's hard. Here's to choosing connection over comfort, and to building bridges where there were once walls." The room erupted into applause, glasses clinking together in celebration. Maya smiled, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be. But in moments like these, she saw glimpses of what was possible. With love, resilience, and authenticity, anything could be overcome. The months following Thanksgiving brought a quiet transformation within the Thompson family. A shift so subtle that it might have gone unnoticed by outsiders, but to Maya, it felt monumental. Conversations that once revolved around trivial matters, like recipes or gardening tips, now delved into deeper topics: racial inequality, systemic bias, and the importance of representation. Relatives who had previously dismissed such discussions as irrelevant began asking questions, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes hesitantly, but always with a genuine desire to understand. Maya noticed these changes during Sunday phone calls with her adoptive mother. Mrs. Thompson would often share updates about books she was reading or documentaries she had watched, seeking Maya's perspective on what she'd learned. "I never realized how much I didn't know," Mrs. Thompson confessed one afternoon, her voice tinged with both humility and determination. "It's overwhelming at times, but I want to do better. For you, for everyone." These conversations weren't always easy. There were moments when old biases crept in, leading to uncomfortable silences or defensive remarks. But instead of shutting down, the family worked through them together. They stumbled, they faltered, but they kept moving forward. Maya admired their willingness to confront their shortcomings, even if progress came in small, incremental steps. Daniel played a pivotal role in this evolution. His calm demeanor and patient explanations helped bridge gaps that had long seemed insurmountable. When an uncle made a clumsy comment about affirmative action during a holiday gathering, Daniel responded not with anger, but with understanding. "I get why it might seem unfair at first glance," he said gently. "But imagine carrying the weight of generations of discrimination. These policies aren't perfect, but they're a step toward leveling the playing field." His words resonated deeply, prompting thoughtful reflections from those who listened. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. The Thompsons weren't perfect. They still had blind spots and occasional missteps. but they were learning. And in Maya's eyes, that effort mattered more than anything else. Back in Chicago, Maya and Daniel continued building their own life together, finding joy in the everyday moments that made their bond stronger. Weekends were spent exploring museums, trying out new restaurants, or simply lounging at home with cups of coffee and good music. Their apartment became a sanctuary filled with laughter, love, and shared dreams. Yet, no matter how busy life got, Maya never lost sight of the impact her journey had on others. She received messages from friends and acquaintances inspired by her courage to stand firm in her truth. Some confided in her about their own struggles, feeling caught between cultures, battling imposter syndrome, or grappling with identity. Maya listened without judgment, offering advice when asked, but mostly just being present. In doing so, she realized that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It had become a source of hope for others navigating similar paths. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Maya stumbled upon a post from Emily. Her younger sister had written a heartfelt essay about growing up alongside someone as strong and resilient as Maya. "She taught me that love isn't passive, it's active," Emily wrote. "It's about showing up, speaking out, and standing beside the people who matter most. Because of her, I've learned to embrace differences rather than fear them." Reading those words brought tears to Maya's eyes. For so long she had carried the weight of feeling like an outsider, wondering if her presence truly made a difference. Now, seeing the ripple effects of her choices reminded her of the power of authenticity. By choosing to live unapologetically, she had inspired those around her to do the same. As spring approached, Maya found herself reflecting on how far she had come since returning to her hometown for Emily's wedding. What had started as a weekend filled with tension and uncertainty had blossomed into something beautiful, a testament to the resilience of love and the possibility of change. She thought about the relatives who had initially resisted Daniel's presence but now welcomed him warmly. She thought about her adoptive parents whose efforts to understand her experiences had deepened their relationship. And she thought about herself, the woman she had become after years of self-doubt and struggle. On a crisp April morning, Maya and Daniel decided to take a walk through Lincoln Park, one of their favorite spots in the city. Cherry blossoms lined the pathways, their pink petals fluttering softly in the breeze. As they strolled hand in hand, Maya paused to admire the view, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You know," she said, turning to Daniel with a smile, "I used to think happiness was something I had to chase, like it was always just out of reach. But now I realize it's been here all along, in the little things and the people we choose to surround ourselves with." Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You deserve every bit of it, love, every moment of peace, every laugh, every tear. You've earned it." They stood there for a while, watching the sunlight dance across the lake. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but in moments like these, Maya felt content. She had faced her fears, challenged societal norms, and emerged stronger because of it. With Daniel by her side and a family slowly learning to embrace her fully, she knew she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. That summer, the Thompsons hosted their annual family reunion, a tradition Maya had skipped for several years. This time, however, she eagerly accepted the invitation, excited to see how much had changed. The event took place at a lakeside cabin, where laughter echoed across the water and children ran barefoot through the grass. Maya and Daniel arrived holding hands, greeted by warm hugs and genuine smiles. Throughout the weekend, Maya marveled at the transformation within her family. Conversations flowed freely, free of the guardedness that had once defined their interactions. Even distant cousins who had once whispered behind her back now approached her openly, eager to learn more about her life and experiences. One particularly poignant moment came when a young niece shyly asked Maya about growing up as a black woman in a white family. "It wasn't always easy," Maya admitted, kneeling down to meet the girl's eye level. "There were times when I felt like I didn't belong, but I learned to embrace who I am even when it was hard, and guess what? That's when things started to change, not just for me, but for everyone around me." The girl nodded thoughtfully, her wide eyes reflecting admiration. "You're really brave," she said softly. Maya smiled, ruffling the child's hair. So are you. Never forget that. By the end of the reunion, Maya felt a profound sense of belonging, a feeling she hadn't experienced since childhood. It wasn't because everything was perfect. It was because imperfections were acknowledged and embraced. Her family had taken significant strides toward understanding her journey, and while there was still work to be done, she believed in their capacity for growth. On the drive back to Chicago, Maya leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, feeling a deep sense of peace. "Do you remember that day at the wedding when everything felt so uncertain?" she asked. "Of course," Daniel replied, glancing at her with a grin. "You looked stunning, by the way." Maya laughed before continuing. "I just keep thinking about how much has changed since then, how far we've all come." "That's the thing about life," Daniel said, his tone thoughtful. "It's full of unexpected twists and turns. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the most beautiful outcomes." Maya nodded, her gaze drifting to the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. She thought about the lessons she had learned, that love is resilient, that growth requires vulnerability, and that authenticity has the power to transform not only oneself, but also those around them. Through trials and triumphs, she had discovered her strength and redefined her relationships. As the car hummed along the highway, Maya allowed herself to dream of the future, a future built on love, acceptance, and endless possibilities. Whatever came next, she knew she was ready. After all, she had already proven that even the toughest obstacles could be overcome with courage, patience, and an unwavering belief in oneself.